Hello everybody, this is David. Welcome back to my channel. Well, this is the next in our series, The Christian Ethic in the 21st Century. And we're currently looking at what's known as the cradle of the Christian ethic. And we're looking at the Judaism part of the Judeo-Christian ethic. In the last video, we saw that the Jewish people had been chosen by God and that there were consequences of being chosen. In this video, I want to start with having a look at what those consequences are. Now, the idea of being chosen has certain consequences, and they are not the consequences that you would expect. Firstly, it brings a terrifying sense of responsibility. There is a devastating passage in the book of Amos. Amos has been reciting the sins of the people after people, for example, of Damascus, Gaza, Tyre, Edom, Ammon, Moab, the long and terrible list, and to each its doom. Then he comes to Israel, and this is in the book of Amos, chapter 2 and 3. Now, the feeling is that he is going to say that as Israel is the chosen people, that therefore they've got no need to worry. Everything will be all right. So the voice of God comes through the prophet, and this is what he said. This is what God says. You only have I chosen of all the families of the earth. Now the hearers are probably prepared to sit back comfortably. Oh, we're going to be okay. But then comes the shattering sentence. Therefore, I will punish you for all of your iniquities. That's the book of Amos, chapter 3, verse 2. So the greater your privilege, the greater your responsibility. The better the chance God gives us, the more blameworthy we are if we fail him. This is one of the most dreadful therefores. You have I chosen, therefore you will I punish. So secondly, equally, clearly this chosenness must result in obedience. Moses says to the people in Deuteronomy chapter 27 verses 9 and 10, this day, in other words today, you have become the people of the Lord your God. Therefore you shall obey the voice of the Lord your God, keeping his commandments and his statutes. So not being chosen, therefore, means that you're exempt from obedience, but being chosen means being forever under the obligation to obedience. If then this obedience is the very essence of life, the law which must be obeyed becomes for the Jew the most important thing in life. As Moses said of the law when he was making his farewell speech to the people in Deuteronomy chapter 32 verses 46 and 47, he says, it is no trifle, in other words, not a small thing, it is your life. The law was how they knew the will of God, and it was through the law that the necessary obedience could be rendered or given. So this obedience had one obvious consequence. It meant that if this obedience were accepted, the Jews had to be prepared to be different from all the other nations. The word of God was quite clear. They were not to be like the Egyptians they were leaving, and they were not to be like the Canaanites into whose land they were going. As we read in the book of Leviticus chapter 18 verses 1 to 5 and 20, 23 and 24. God had separated them from the other peoples, from the other nations. So here we come to the text and the saying which more than any other are of the essence of the Jewish religion. The voice that they heard again and again said to them over and over again, you shall be holy because I am holy. And we read that in the book of Leviticus chapter 20 verse 26 and a few other verses, many, many times actually, you shall be holy, for I am holy. So the basic meaning of the word holy is different. The Sabbath was holy because it was different from the other days. The Bible is holy because it's different from the other books. The temple was holy because it was different from all other buildings. And God is supremely holy because God is supremely different. Now, the first duty of the Jew is to be different. He is separated. He is chosen. He is God's, and therefore he is different. Now, this explains two of the great ethical problems of the Old Testament. There was about the Jews a complete exclusiveness. We'll talk more a little bit about that later. A Jew was to make no covenant with any other nation, as we read in the book of Exodus, chapter 23, verse 32, and chapter 34, verses 12 to 15. Intermarriage with persons of any other nation was and is absolutely forbidden, as we read in the book of Exodus, chapter 34, verse 16, and the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 7, verse 3. Here we also have the explanation of certain things in the Old Testament which have always been to the Western mind quite shocking, because the Western mind, and probably many other people, many other Christians all around the world in different cultures, have very often not understood them or even tried to understand them. So, for example, in war, the shrines of any other nation were to be utterly destroyed, as we read in the book of Exodus chapter 23 and 24, and Deuteronomy 7 verse 5 and 12 verse 3. Now, it's here that we come on that command which is so often quoted against the Old Testament. This is what people, unbelievers, atheists, have a real problem with. Now, if a city surrendered, the inhabitants of it were to be made slaves. If a city resisted and was in the end conquered, you shall save nothing alive, as we read in the book of Deuteronomy chapter 20, verses 10 to 18. Now, men and women and children were to be obliterated. And so within a nation, if a man left Judaism and became an apostate, that is, an unbeliever, he was to be destroyed without mercy, as we read in Deuteronomy chapter 13 verses 12 to 18 and chapter 17 verses 2 to 7. Now, things like that shock us today in our 21st century thinking, but we must try to understand at the heart of this there was nothing personal, there was no hatred. What there was a passion for purity. Nothing, absolutely nothing, must be allowed to taint or spoil or ruin the purity of Israel. The infection must be mercilessly rooted out. Holiness had to be protected by the extermination of the enemies, not of Israel, but of holiness and of God. Now, there's nothing political here. There is no thought of a master race who will exterminate other peoples. It is holiness that matters. The day had not yet come, and it was to come in the New Testament, that is, when they began to see that the best way to destroy God's enemies is not to kill them, but to make them his friends. That's what the gospel is all about. That's what the Christian gospel is all about. God's enemies are not to be destroyed by annihilation. God's enemies are to be destroyed by converting them. But early on, the passion for holiness produced the demand for destruction, a demand which is not to be condemned with our modern mind without being understood. So the second ethical problem is to be found in a feature of the Jewish law which leaves anyone who has studied it amazed. And again, this is a problem for so many people because they don't understand it. One of the strangest things in the Jewish law is the way in which the ethical and the ritual, the moral and the ceremonial are put side by side. Things are put side by side, one thing which seems to be matter intensely, and another thing which does not seem to matter at all, in our view, of course. And they seem to be treated as of equal importance. So let's look at an example, shall we, from the book of Leviticus, chapter 19, verses 17 to 19, where we read, "You shall not hate your brother in your heart, but you shall reason with your neighbour, lest you bear sin against him. You shall not take vengeance or bear any grudge against the sons of your people, but you shall love your neighbour as yourself. I am the Lord. You shall keep my statutes. You shall not let your cattle breed with a different kind. You shall not sow your field with two kinds of seed, nor shall you wear a cloth made of two kinds of material." So this passage begins with one of the greatest ethical principles that has ever been laid down. That is to love your neighbour as yourself. And it ends with a prohibition of wearing clothes made of a certain kind of cloth. The reason for which to our modern mind is completely obscure. We have the ethical and the ritual mixed up together at the same time. Now, a great many people criticise Judaism because it makes so much of a physical thing like circumcision, because of its food laws and things like that. But it's crystal clear that if Judaism had not had these laws, it would not have survived at all. The point is this. You ready for this? A good man is a good man in almost any religion or philosophy. Plato, Aristotle, Thomas Aquinas, Immanuel Kant, John Stuart Mill, a Stoic, a Christian, a Jew, all agree on what honour and honesty and courage and chastity are. C.S. Lewis spoke of the triumphant monotony of the same indispensable platitudes which meet us in culture after culture. End of quote. If it was just a matter of morals, there was no great difference in the action of the Greek, the Roman, the Jew, or the Christian good man. What made the Jew stand out, what made him different, is his ceremonial law. You can tell him, a Jew that is, by what he eats and what he does not eat. The point is that the Jewish ceremonial law is designed to show the essential difference of the Jew. It was his witness to Judaism, and so far, and instead of mocking it or criticizing it, it was that we must remember that kept Judaism alive. So the Jew has always been the great nonconformist. For the Jew, and all honour to him, the Jew is the man who had the courage to be different. Now I'm going to end the video here. In the next video, we're going to be looking at the greatest contribution of the Jewish religion to ethics, and that is the Jewish insistence on the connection between religion and ethics. So I want to thank you for joining me in this video. I'll see you on the next one. Bye bye.